Goals.
Thanks, Matt. All right, well, good morning. We'll get started and welcome more people as they come. Gracie, are you online? All right, well. Is someone monitoring that? Yeah, when she jumps in, we'll welcome her. So we have, I passed around the agenda that went around last week. I appreciate the work people did.
That's all right.
On the homework, you should all have a copy of the agenda. Stapled to the agenda is kind of that summary of the Orono Good Neighbor Committee that we looked at our first meeting, which include the goals, the order creating this committee, the participants and the committee charge. So just I didn't intend to go through that, but I thought it'd be handy just to have it in front of us as we talk today. And in terms of attendance, this for the record, for when we go back and look at it, we've got Mitch, Clint, Dennis. We've got Officer LaJoy. What's your first? I'm sorry. Scott LaJoy. I apologize. I would have had it if I had a second to think about it, but then I looked up and it's like, that's not Dan Merrill. We have Chad, Leo, Jody, we have Matt, Diane is here. Hey, Dan. We have handouts and stuff over here. And I expect Rob, Lori's not gonna be able to be with us. Yeah, that's all right. And that. And this is the disorderly property ordinance that we looked at.
That's a high school thing.
I know, it is. So for the work we had, kind of the homework assignments that we had to look over the disorderly property ordinance. And you all have a paper copy of that, and to discuss and think about ideas for a good neighbor definition. So on the and then we're going to talk about those. So those are items 2 and 3 on our agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about the communications plan and material progress report. We're going to hear from the town manager and discuss a little bit, where we think we need to go in terms of town attorney consultations, in terms of that kind of work. Update the timeline, talk about any additional homework we think we ought to have, and then we'll adjourn. Just for our timeline discussions and our discussion today, we are at, we're hoping to have, we're expecting to have a report back to the council no later than July 15th. So for some initial work, and we may work beyond that, I suppose, but that's just to keep our brains. Does anybody have anything else for agenda items or things that you want to raise? We get started. Okay. I think it makes sense to go out of order a little bit and discuss the good neighbor definition first, instead of and then go into the disorderly property ordinance and talk about kind of what types of things need to be in that to, if we kind of reach a consensus. So we had, yeah.
I like the order you've had, and mainly because I guess the starting point for me seems to be to understand, like,
What's that? Yeah.
or what's not working.
Yeah.
Is it working, and if not, what's not working?
Okay, let's stick with that then.
And that seems
Hey, Brian.
like a discussion that's gonna require staff to tell us a little more. We can read it and think things about it and think of edits, but I mean, as far as like right there, what is not working about it? It seems like a.
All right, well, let's talk about that then. So on the document that has the being a good neighbor in Orono, if you flip it over, it's got disorderly property ordinance review. So I went through and I got a little input on a couple of these, but I went through the stuff that we talked about at our last meeting, where I thought we had some opportunities for, we wanted to address. And I went through and kind of matched them up with the disorderly property ordinance. But if it makes sense, maybe we should talk about what the ordinance does now first and how it's being implemented, and maybe do a 5-minute dive on that, and then talk about, go back to any reflections people have on the ordinance in general. So if that makes sense, I don't know, Scott or you, if Clint want to kind of walk us through, I know you've been working through it with a property owner, like in real time, you're working on that now, so you want to kind of walk us through how you're using it now?
Well, I mean, so we obviously had the two incidents last year, both led to disorderly properties. And the first one, it's kind of a very unique situation where the events played out afterwards, but we did, in working with that, we recognized, and there was some changeover of property management. It was troublesome as well, but when we get to the second one in the fall or in the spring, you know, we got right on the notification, in-person meeting, copy of your rental agreements, you know, plan of action to move forward. Second that meeting happened, we found an extremely responsive process. The management company was extremely interested, ready to work with us, doesn't want any ongoing problems. Made it clear that all their rental agreements have an eviction notice clause for fines within the town, that they pass those fines on to them, and that they are passing them on. And it seems to be, there was just a genuine level of support. So I think from the perspective of the town is that if we're doing them very proactively from the beginning, that would be a much better situation. I think some of the things that I've gleaned, talked to Mitch, talked to Dan, sure Dan's chatted with Officer of Joy, you know, and gone over all the different things that we can do, but we thought tenant names at registration. When we do the rental registrations, that you have to put down who you rented it to. Just a name of a person that lives on site. If that changes and you don't tell us, it could lead to an issue, but you just gotta give us one name of a responsible person living in the facility. Now, again, that would be for all. We would not be able to do that at very large facilities. Meaning like if you own 80 units, 100 units at a property in town, we're not gonna look, it would be almost impossible to figure that out. But I think when you're looking at a place where it's, you know, 4 units or less, that's something that would be reasonable. Say, can you give us, you know, who lives in A, B, C, and D? Can you give us a responsible party for each of the 4? With landlords here in the room, you tell me if that's a good or a bad idea, but we think that would be.
So you're gonna create regulatory burden for small landlords that you're not gonna create for large ones?
Well, yeah, correct.
Do it for all or none,
How do you do it for all?
then don't do it for any.
Okay, then we won't.
Well, I was thinking about
That
that.
easy?
The app has a lot more administrative capacity and help than I do. So, right, if they don't have to do it, why should I do it?
Well,
Because they're in a commercial zone and you're in a mixed media business, just, I mean, just.
Some of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, okay.
my thought was that should be the exception, not the rule, though, because there was a time, I think, a couple of years ago where they asked about putting some of the leagues. It didn't feel comfortable to me, putting people's names.
Well, once you have a violation, we will find out.
That's what I mean.
But that's what we're comfortable with. It was one of the things that as a staff, we talked about, could that be an area for improvement?
Well, and I think with two times in the last year, and I don't know what, probably similar other years, it seems like as long that information, that's when
It gets.
that's when you get it, is when, because I don't know, it's something, and I don't know about the tenant's bill of rights, if they have any right to not have their name sent across. I don't know that either, so that.
I know I don't release tenants' names unless somebody shows up
Yeah.
with a legal piece of paper that says you can, because I've had tenants
Hmm.
who don't want people to know where they live.
And the risk for the town is once
for
we
legal
have,
reasons.
and once we know it, it's foyable, which puts us in a different response. So again, it was debatable. The rest of it, when we went through, just to get, well, I mean, there's not much left. We did go through the ordinance. Fines are too low. They don't double. There's no clear hours. There's no notice for disturbance in the property. Could be poor parking. You know, if you're blocking traffic or the ability to get through. Noise not related to our noise ordinance. We feel there's a distinguishment there. The noise ordinance is based upon construction, regular noises that you have a significant problem with. A party does create noise. It's a different noise violation. And for a local ordinance, we felt that it would make sense that if the officer at the street feels that the volume of noise from a particular party, whether it's people, music, etc., that's the beginning of a nuisance property. So they can then enter the property and go forward with turn it down. If they refuse, you know, there's no answers here. I think we've said that before. they'll get brought up as a nuisance property. That does not mean you couldn't have a difficult tenant. Eventually, there's gonna be a relationship between town, landlord, tenant. And that's, I know Dan's gonna get into his sheet. I think it was a great sheet. The only one that I kind of kicked back at him when those ideas was, and I know you've talked about it, and I think there's some further discussion. I don't understand the relationship of the town finding a tenant. The relationship's built by a contract between a landlord and a tenant. Towns have relationships with their owners. And to put us into the tenant relationship, I think becomes a little bit more problematic. Gets us into that same situation. If every landlord's passing these fines on to their tenant, it's one less relationship for us to have to manage in order to improve the parcel. We're working with the landowner. But, that's debatable because I see the perspective of, well, the tenant should be paying a portion of the bill too. If the landlord's not passing it on to the tenants, why are we interjecting ourselves into that?
Yeah.
But if you-
Let me give you an example from last week. So, we had a vote a few months ago. You can find them for it, talk to them about it. They opted not to pay. Okay, I've been rolling 80-hour weeks. I get to choose, do I want to go to court or $500?
Right.
I typically do,
I get,
honestly, because I just want to make a point, but this time I was like, I should have bandwidth to go to court.
Yeah.
So we took it out of their deposit. So that's 3 months later, there was a consequence. If I'm trying to stop what's happening there and it's next to his house, he's gonna now think, Matt's not doing anything. No, I did something. It just took 3 months before it hit their pocketbook, right? If a police officer shows up and says, hi, Jimmy, you threw the party. You owe the town $500. Hi, Mr. Landlord, he's your tenant. You owe $500. Now you have Jimmy's attention. Jimmy didn't have $500. He doesn't mind stiffing me because I'm just a dude in flip flops. He's gonna have a problem stiffing him though, because now he feels like he's in trouble. So he goes to mom and dad and is like, Mom, Dad, I'm in trouble. I need $500. I get this thing from the police. Right now, mom and dad are involved. They're like, I'm gonna give you $500, but Jimmy, you better cut the shit. Because I don't want you in trouble. Yeah, I'm paying for you to go to school, police, right? So you see what I mean? So you get their attention immediately from an authority that is taken more seriously than landlords, the police.
And that's
That's
where we
my
gotta talk to
counter-
an attorney. This is a straight on attorney question.
that's
I
fine.
don't know if we can find a tenant.
I mean, I don't have to even live in Orono to be subject to the noise ordinance, right? If I drive down the street with loudspeakers, you can find me.
Yep.
All right, so I don't have to have property. Just want to go back to the tenant names. I get the regulatory burden. That seems real to me because it changes every year. I just don't get the right to privacy thing because if I own a house, my name is on the rolls with the town. If I own a car, if I own a boat, my name is on the rolls with the town, and a 1-year lease is at least $6,000, $10,000. That's, I don't get why if I own a car, I have to put my name down, but if I lease a property for a year, I don't have to put my name down. Regulatory burden I get, but
Yeah.
privacy I just don't get.
I definitely get the regulatory burden piece too, and I feel like, if we're talking 99% of properties are fine. I don't think Orono needs to know who's on the lease necessarily, but it's those 1% that aren't, and that's where we lean in and we find out as part of the investigatory process, I would think.
So I don't fully know the law on privacy, but I can tell you, I have a tenant currently who does not want her name out, that she's living where that this person is living where they're living. So I think there are reasons for that personally that, if you own property, right, then you're gonna, but I think there are people that at times need to be not known where they are.
I'll give one example. So the privacy argument, I'm not advocating that.
Yeah.
I'm just talking the regulatory burden. I'm an 80-hour week guy. The people working the over 40-hour week people, if I gotta do it, I'm cool with doing it. They gotta do it too.
Yeah.
Right? Because they have staff and I'm the staff, right?
Yeah.
I'm the one who does it, right? But on the privacy side, I really wasn't advocating that. It doesn't matter to me, honestly. As you said that, I thought of something. One of my tenants is in a program because they suffered a type of assault. And I will let you use your imagination what type of assault they suffered. That's probably a tenant who would not want their name published. And since they're the sole person living there, I guess I'd be concerned about a situation like that. Now, that's extremely rare. Obviously, that's not a common type of thing. So maybe there could be, if you were gonna do it, you could have an exemption for something like if someone has had a domestic assault and they've been relocated with the help of a program to be somewhere safer. Like, you don't have to publish their name, something like that, you know? Because this person would have a legitimate reason not to want their name published.
Say a couple things. For, when you're talking about having the police come and fine right away versus something that's gonna take months, I think, I don't know about Brian, but I think we think more on a yearly basis. I mean, I don't think that things happen like this. First of all, I think if you actually show up, that usually calms a party down for weeks just by you guys coming. As far as fines go, I mean, I'm just happy to know that they happen. And I think that it calms them down. You know, it's always in the fall and the spring. So, you know, I don't know, Brian. I mean, do you think that it's necessary that they have a fine right there? I don't know how much that's gonna, if that's like where we really need to put our emphasis or not.
I don't know. I mean, having just lived in Tucson, that fine right there really has an effect. I don't know how strongly I feel about that, but I do feel like the disorderly property is trying to do two things. Right? There's a long-term relationship with the landlord and making sure the landlord's on top of their tenants, right? Which is, I feel like, what it's mostly written to. And there's the immediate public safety issue, right? That hockey house party, sorry, I keep calling it hockey house, and no. But that was just an obvious public safety issue. There were 20 cars parked. The music was incredibly loud. It was so clear that everybody coming into those cars was going to be drunk, or at least 3/4 of the people getting into their cars was probably going to be legally drunk. The students who were walking home were going to be drunk. And as it turns out, that turned out to be the big problem that night. But there is this immediate public safety issue when parties get to a certain size.
So if you use Brian's argument, then it seems like an attorney might have, you know, I don't know how, I mean, I don't know how attorneys work. Other than very slow, so. You know, that seems like a really good argument then, that maybe that should be something that the.
Yeah,
town
I
should-
wouldn't want to confuse these situations, say we'll be quicker. What teeth do we have to enforce the summons? We can we will go the distance, but I mean, even the assaults that occurred in those neighborhoods. I mean, the first one that happened in Halloween hasn't even wrapped up. It's not even close.
Yeah.
So there's gonna, you know, so that's on their side, and we would be similar. If you get a tenant that says, I'm not paying. You know, we'll eventually kick it to the attorney. We can go that fight. And eventually you'll build that reputation. But it'll cost the town money and we'll have to go the distance. And that's where I want the legal opinion. Can we win these? If we're gonna cite a person for a, you know, $500 fine, and because it was after 10 o'clock, we're doubling it to 1,000.
And then.
Some of the ideas, can we get it? Are we actually going to be able to?
So,
collect?
for me, in terms of responsiveness, I think, can we win? Will we win? What are the costs gonna be? That's part of the discussion. But for me, what is the policy priorities we wanna create in Orono and the message that we wanna send? And even if we lose, there's still a cost to the perpetrator for defending themselves and being held to account in a situation where, in that situation, and it shows responsiveness to the neighborhood, that the town has things in place. And there's also the university element to it as well, where, you know, we talk about it a little bit later in this document, and, you know, Lori's not with us today, but we talked about it last week in terms of the student conduct code, and that applies everywhere, to everyone who has, including faculty and staff. There's a conduct code for the university.
Does it get published, Clint? If
What?
if a officer goes to a party, talks to Mitch, because Mitch was naughty, and Mitch gets $200 fine, does that get published anywhere?
We would not.
No, right now you don't.
All right.
No.
Let's take
And I
that.
would heavily want to review that.
Yep.
Yeah,
Because what are we eliciting? What is the intention?
right.
Why are we publicizing it?
Right, right.
Is
I
it to
guess
make
the
a
reason
person
I
feel
asked-
unwelcome in their own neighborhood because they made one mistake,
Right.
hypothetically?
Yeah.
Or is it because we want to notify the other neighbors that there's a house and there's a problem here?
I was only asking because students are here to make an investment in the future so they can get jobs, right? And if they do stupid things while they're here, they get them in trouble with the law. That's going to make it harder for them to get a job. Now, I'm not suggesting one time to, you know, somebody has a loud party once should necessarily damage their future, but if it's a recurring thing over and over again, that gets published, that's a pretty good reason to keep your nose clean. Because if it's published, now all the job search tools that are out there for employers are gonna catch all that stuff, just like they catch civil cases and criminal stuff. That all shows up in a report to a prospective employer, and they're like, these guys were cited 3 times in college for like disorderly parties. I don't. Maybe this isn't the person that we want to hire. You know what I mean? Again, I'm not saying, you know, they do it once, they should have that kind of repercussion, but if they're like a routine problem, I don't know, that's a deterrent for them to continue to do that, you know?
All right, any more general observations on the ordinance before we dive into some of the opportunities for,
Yes,
yeah, it's good, Jody?
just a question and observation, and I'm not, this is not perfectly analogous, but I'm struggling to understand why somebody wouldn't be fined for bad behavior living in a property. The analogy I draw is if you're driving somebody else's car and you're speeding, you still get a ticket. So I don't understand the difference if you're a renter or a property owner. If you're the responsible, you're living in the property, it's your behavior. There's an accountability there. You can't say, well, yeah, I was speeding, but it's my mom's car. The thing about these ordinances are they're hugely subjective. So that I think could be problematic. I mean, leaving it down to, I don't know how we deal with that. Like, how do you register noise, decibel, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, one police officer who might be answering a gazillion calls in a day on a given weekend here in Orono, their idea of what's loud, there's no perfect criteria. This is not an objective way of assessing a situation. I don't know what we do with that. I'm just throwing it out there. There's a lot in these ordinances. And I've seen it play out in nearly 40 years of living here. It is super subjective, and that gets us into the weeds, and that gets us into trouble legally too. So if there's any way in any of this going forward, we can remove some of that subjectivity, I think we would be well served.
Just real quick, as we know, when we drive through BZ, we do the speed limit, right? Because the expectation is set. So if you hand out a fine at that point, say over at the hockey house, it's a Friday night, they get $1,000 fine. They may not have a party Saturday night. If they don't get the fine, they just get an officer showing up. Well, they're more likely gonna have a party Saturday night. So if we set the expectation right from the beginning, hey, this is your $1,000 fine. If I show up tomorrow night, it's $2,000. Then it might really start, they might start thinking, wow, geez, that's $3,000 in one weekend. And who knows, it might deter them from having that party. Just my opinion.
Okay,
Aren't all ordinance violations civil, not criminal?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which changes
Mhm.
everything.
there
I mean,
are,
your point about somebody driving a vehicle, that's a law, that's a
Mhm.
crime.
Yeah.
So it's easier for this gentleman to hand somebody a summons and send him to court than it is on an ordinance.
Right, I
violation.
wasn't really speaking to that. It's not a perfect solution, but there is a responsibility. You can't blame the fact that you don't own the vehicle that you're in, whether it's a home or a car.
Yeah.
For your behavior inside said home or car.
and it's probably, I mean, there's some likelihood that at a disorderly event, activity, there's, particularly in our community, there's some sort of illegal, like criminal activity taking place. I mean, I would think, and I know we don't. But be that as it may, do we want to,
Just a
Yeah.
quick observation and also a suggestion. I did see on page 3 that an officer may investigate
in the absence of a
upon their own
complaint?
observation, yeah, so
Yeah.
that's good to understand, I think. But the other one in here, as far as what happens after you're delivering it. I don't know if it was Jody that kind of mentioned, but seems like worth some consideration, instead of saying meeting with the property manager or owner, is just striking out property manager and requiring that owner to show up.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
So that seems like.
Because who knows if that owner gets that information from the property manager.
Okay.
And I don't know if we, that's just maybe a suggestion that might have some teeth, I think.
Yeah. So I liked, in terms of like my observations, I think the fines are way too low. It feels like a convoluted process to get on the nuisance list. The sort of the property list. I did also note that this clear stipulation, in the absence of a complaint, an officer may investigate a disorderly activity based upon the officer's own independent observation. I'm confused based on what Chief Merrill told us,
Yeah.
based on that language and what he told us about not needing to have a complaint before we can investigate things.
So I was wondering, 'cause
So-
you said that,
so-
I didn't understand if that's a change.
It's civil. That's, so we're getting back to this issue and we're looking into this. This is pretty tricky territory because we want to maintain socially responsible policing. And this is opening a door to targeting. Not gonna hide from it one bit. This, if not well managed and well overseen, this is a taking a little bit out of that social responsible policing. But if we're going to achieve the goal that we don't have to have a complaint from against it, and that the officers can drive through a neighborhood and see 18 cars parked there, that's the only way they're gonna be able to effectuate a change, because no one's called to complain about the cars. They drove through, they saw them. They're blocking the road, gonna go out, ticket the cars, and then, oh, where is that noise coming from? That is incessant. That's all on their own, and there's no crime been completed, no complaints been made, and in order to get to that, we had to have some sort of clause like this. And I think where the chief's been careful with you, it's a community that really likes socially responsible policing. This is a little bit of a diminishment of that approach.
What about someone like Officer Lusky or somebody who's not an officer? I mean, he's not an officer anymore. Somebody who's a community or a social worker or somebody else that's not criminal.
Not working at 11 o'clock.
Right.
Saturday
That's what
night.
I was wondering.
Yeah, we don't have-
I mean, would that be a position? I don't know.
We
That would-
I veered away from adding positions to this solution. That's where I've been trying.
That's what a lot of towns are doing now, is they're adding a social worker, so when they see somebody on PCP or somebody's, crying or doing something in the streets, they're not arrested. Instead, we find out, what are you on? Do you have schizophrenia? Where are your meds, et cetera? So, but could someone like that go up to a house because they're not an officer?
Ooh, talk to me. I mean, an unlicensed officer walking on private property. Yeah, it's a civilian, basically, town employee civilian, but not operating. They'd have to be a code officer or something to give authority to visit the property.
Well, anybody can walk on anybody's property as long as it's not posted. Right,
I do.
The course of,
I know you do.
they can walk onto somebody's property through the front door.
Yeah.
I mean, anybody can essentially do that.
Yeah.
To what extent and for what purposes? That's when it probably gets a little bit more.
And there's some liability and risk on the town side. What are we training them in?
So we're together now at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning to set policy, assess these things, set policy and priority, work with our professional staff to, yeah. We're gonna make recommendations, council's gonna set policy. And then, we're gonna ask our professional staff to do everything they need to do to make sure it's legal and resourced appropriately and deliver results. And, I think that I think we need to understand, I think as part of this work, if assuming the council moves forward with something, that staff will have to come back to us with a policy, either a department policy change or emphasis on how they're gonna respond. Me as one citizen, knowing that we invest as much as we do in our department and we have the professionalism and the staff that we do. I wanna, if there's clearly an event going on in the community that's unruly and likely to lead to trespassing, violence, any number of things, a dangerous behavior, I want the Orono Police Department to respond to it. And I think that's my hope for what this work accomplishes. And if we gotta figure it out with the attorneys, we'll figure it out with the attorneys. If we have to resource it differently, we'll resource it differently. But that's what I think the residents of our neighborhoods want, so.
Go ahead.
I guess my position on this has changed through time. When I started, I was like, the noise ordinance, you don't want, people running a lawnmower at 6:45 a.m. instead of 7 a.m.
Yeah.
Getting pulled over and said, don't touch the noise ordinance. It's all on this disorderly property. But the more I look at this, I think we need to unpack this. I think the fact that I have a noise ordinance is unenforceable. I heard that from the chief. And I understand it. I read it. It's like, gosh, this is how a scientist.
It's not enforceable in these situations.
Yeah.
It is enforceable when you're talking about a concert or a construction. that you
Construction,
didn't
right.
calculate.
That's right. It's not enforceable on parties. And I get it. I look at the specs and it's like, oh, that's how I measure things as a scientist, right? That's not how you're gonna measure things when you're driving down the street in a police car. So I think the noise ordinance needs to come back on the table. So it applies to parties. And I think the disorderly property, like I said a little while ago, really is serving two purposes. One is about a relationship with the landlord, which is civil, right? And for which we want to have a strong presumption of not being able to do it discriminatorily. Right? So I think those are all important, but there also just is this emergent issue of a giant party, the kegger, right? Which I fundamentally think is a public safety issue, right? It has turned into a public safety issue multiple times in the past year. And I don't, this disorderly property as it's set up right now is not set up to deal with that public safety issue, right? It doesn't even start to kick in till the next day. I mean, it gives permission to disband the party if you want, but I think there's multiple issues running around, and increasingly when I came in, I was like, just put the Tucson ordinance on top of and replace the current. But I increasingly think there's multiple issues running around here, and I think the noise issue is a real issue. I think the kegger is an issue, and then there is this longer term thing about relationships with landlords and town buildings relationships with landlords and holding landlords accountable and things. So I think there's a bunch of things happening here. It's maybe not a simple fix.
What responsibility can we put on the university to, I know we can report the school of conduct, the code of conduct to the university, but is there anything else that we can put on them that can alleviate some of the town? Just to,
Make them build their own dorms and police their own students.
yeah. Didn't know
I think that
if
ship sailed.
I-
a while.
yeah.
Yeah, and that depends on the state legislature funding dorms, which they don't do, so.
I want to just, I guess, comment on Dan, your point about this. I want them to, police to do this. This is what neighbors want. I think we need to be a little cautious because there are laws that need, and I know you said that, this is gonna be legal, but this is what we want. So this is what we're, kind of what we're doing. And I almost hearing the discussion about, officers can investigate based on their own. I do wonder if that's an ordinance that is in there, but maybe might, if pressed, we would lose that maybe if not to the chief's point of like, I can't, I have the complaint.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and that happens. I mean, with all ordinance, we do our best. Legal looks at it. We don't know if it's legal until it gets challenged. So I think we need to be cautious about, hey, I want this to happen.
Well, I do, that's why I'm
without-
here, and that's why I think.
I
all
know,
of us are here,
you
but, yeah.
can't step all over the rights and laws that
But
are.
looking
that
to
are
it,
in
I'm
place.
looking to set kind of what our expectations are as a community, and I think others are too. And have some responsiveness to these clearly, these episodes that are clearly a problem in our neighborhoods. And I wouldn't want to, I know I wouldn't want to live next to it. I would move. I wouldn't live where you live. If these parties were going on all the
On the
time.
river.
You get a gorgeous view.
I know she does. But, and I love it. I'd go live on College, where, there's nice views on the river where you don't have to live across from unlicensed, disruptive events every Friday or Saturday night, potentially Thursday nights. And I would move. And I'm fortunate that I have the means to do it, but I don't want people to be, I don't want anyone to want to have to live in that situation long term.
Because there was communities you're gonna force good people that move to this town that wanna raise families, you're gonna force them out if we don't do something about the ordinance.
That's what we've already seen. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the family homes, they went going to management or cross or whoever. I mean, so I've seen multiple family homes go
Yeah.
to rentals since I've been living there for 23 years.
Every time a for sale sign goes up in Webster side, there's a huge conversation about, is this gonna be the time this house flips?
Yeah.
You think that too.
You're seeing single family houses over there turned into rental units?
Yeah. I mean,
So by
it was
By
supposed to.
code, you can't rent to more than 3 unrelated people.
Well, the hockey house was a single family home
Next one.
until 2000. We talked about it the first day when it was sold, 2018 or
Unless
so.
it's legally non-conforming.
But who follows up with to see who's living that,
Code's pretty strict. Code's pretty strict.
Another house was, I mean, there was.
If you felt like there was a single family home next to you that 7 people were living in, and you sent an email to code, and they would go over and verify, if that's verified, that landlord is gonna get a big fine, they're gonna be in big trouble, 100%.
Well, sometimes, I know we're wandering a little, but I know that sometimes the issues aren't even whether or not there's too many people in the house. It's the presentation of everything, the house at the end of Crosby with the intersection of Route 2 by the baseball field. was a single family home. This older woman owned that and she has passed away, and that house is crammed with people now. There's been, the expanded driveways, parking situation with no retaining wall, there's one on Pierce Street as well. Single family home, the Hornsby's owned that for years, and now the owner lives there, but there's a lot of tenants in there, and they brought in tons of gravel to add parking. There is no retaining wall. There was no earthwork done. There was none. It's just gonna slide, right? And so you see these houses, whether or not their capacity issue is met, just from an exterior zoning perspective in terms of abutting property values, when they turn the front yard into a mud pit because people are parking there, or it's just becomes some version of a parking lot, all of that has a downward effect on the investment that we have all made in our properties. And it's a culture of behavior that is more than just one thing, right? It's not just too loud a party. It's not just too many people in the house. It's a culture of behavior and, acceptability within a neighborhood that can, over time, either increase the value of our investments or decrease them. And, what I've seen in the last 10 years in Webster has been a decrease, a diminishment because of these houses that have flipped and landlords that have allowed things to happen and tenants that have done things. And maybe it skates by on a town ordinance, but the overall effect is just down.
Which is a good thing to talk about. My a friend of mine lives over here in like the Mountain View area. And she was saying how, a friend came who was gonna be working, for a news presser over at Maine. And they were talking, she said, the only thing I heard was not to live in the Webster side. Because, that's where all the college kids are. So it's something they hear, not to live where we live.
The reputation.
All the same.
We'd like to sell our house someday and.
Yeah. House.
I think it's a great point too, right? Your point about moving, I would do the same thing. I would 100% do that. But to your point about the investment, some of these people have been in these homes 5, 10, 15, 20 years. If you have a mortgage that's 2.5%.
Yeah.
And you're forced to sell and move because you just don't want to live next to this mess anymore.
Expensive.
Now you're looking at 7%. If you're good at amortization tables,
Yeah.
you went from a mortgage where 70% of your payment went to principal to a mortgage where 80% of your payment goes to interest.
Yeah.
And that's a heck of a hit to take to get away from a party zone, right?
It is.
You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
I agree. I mean,
So let's do
it's
this.
a big deal. I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not to mention, I actually like living next to most college students.
I know.
Yeah.
Your neighborhood's my favorite neighborhood daytime. It's like a Dracula type situation during the day. Somewhere in the daytime.
Comes back after July 4th now. And I go over there, I do go over there at 2 in the morning and say, I did not buy a
Sign up
house
for this.
for the summer for you to be here.
Yeah.
And I'm very explicit with them.
And to really highlight the effect that a few bad houses have on an entire neighborhood. We live at 24 Crosby Street. We've got a big lot. Nobody's behind us. All of our abutting neighbors are either they live there or they live there part-time. We don't have Diane's situation. We don't have your situation. We don't have the noise. Now, we have the wandering streams of shrieking, chest-bearing students and some of the garbage, and mostly we have the frightening speeding regardless of stop signs. But we don't have that. We live in a different neighborhood.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is an important point because it's not every rental, it's not every landlord,
Yeah.
it's not every house. So, what we're doing here is if in Webster, if we could stabilize specific properties and specific landlord management situations to work with us, I think we would have 180-degree change.
And I mean, the owner of that house that we talk about doesn't want to sell it, right? So I mean, he's kind of like, yep, so we're stuck on terms, it says building the relationship. So we have, landlords like Matt and Dennis who are working with the community and really want to be good partners and that's how I think about this. And I don't want to make it more expensive or more administrative burdens for landlords who are doing their job and doing it well. I don't want to. So
Just to Brian's point of, the goals or what we're looking for out of the disorderly, one is relationship with landlords. I think I just heard that it's working. These people are at the table. Occasionally, maybe it doesn't work, but I think on that, the one that we're all here for, basically because of, they're at the table, they're working with us. So I mean, check on the first one. I think that the second one, the giant party thing, is more where we're at.
Right.
Yeah.
Put something in place where the next irresponsible situation doesn't pop up, right? So it's good to have these stabilized, but we need to put things in place, in my opinion, that prevent this from happening again, because this has been like whack-a-mole.
Some of the simple ordinances too, like you're talking about the parking, didn't we talk about that, all that parking that we've talked about, just throwing the gravel down that first day, didn't someone say that they can't do that? It's a coding thing. So if someone just went out and simply took a look at those gravel parking lots.
There's a house on Peters, and I don't even think it's a rental, but it sold a couple years ago, and over time, just a little ranch. The whole front yard is just mud tracks and cars, and I don't think it's a rental. I mean, I've
My
talked.
goodness.
It's against that. There's an ordinance against parking in front of your house.
And there's no gravel, and it looks like hell, and so you kind of, when you get this downslide, it's easier for more bad things to happen. It just is.
There's been too many things we check on these people, like,
Right.
you know, these kids know, I realize, oh, I can't do whatever I want. There's somebody who's, you know, even though mom's not around, somebody is.
And for the record, I don't want our police department profiling people. And I think that also, if it's incumbent upon renters and landlords to be responsible, then, you know, it's incumbent upon the rest of us to make the phone call so that our police force isn't dependent
Can
on.
we be calling about I mean, did the coding officer ever like just go around?
So this is, okay, so we're getting into all the things that, I
Yeah.
think we're close here, but I feel like we
Keep
keep
expanding it.
getting out into the. It's a great conversation. I mean, there is a real problem here. And I think you're all onto the right track, and I think the town's ready to help as well, which is always the case. The ordinance has the disorderly has some specific things that can be done to make it a noise ordinance, to do a few things. Staff's already been working on, what we're doing with or without, you know, whatever's going on, but our code department is complaint-based and cannot keep up. And there's just no way. So but again, with council support, I've asked to let us look into that, because we lost our administrative assistant. We now have somebody down there, but she took a new job, and we now recruited a great new employee in there. I had to have some time. We're gonna look into this. I want to get a better handle of how many ordinances Orono have that we have to enforce, and how many staff members would you really have to do a non-complaint based approach to this? Don't just give us a new code person, but we are taking Ed out of police, who's a community police, and we're gonna resource him at least a day a week towards this. And I think that's some of the stuff, you know, when you look into this, we're looking at how we break up parties. You know, we're doing an internal procedure on party, how you end a party as a police department. What's the appropriate standards for staying in the neighborhood, keeping an eye on things? Unpublished, not gonna be shared. Cause the last thing we need is a educated partier knowing when we leave, cause then they can just wait. It's been 45 minutes, turn the radio back on. You know, at least I don't think I've forgotten completely what it was like to be a college kid. And I do remember some of those thoughts. But you know, I think you're right. The noise, something's off with the noise ordinance in general. I just don't know if it relates. I don't know if that's the top priorities we're moving through. So, you know, and doing more with community engagement, and obviously the education, we're working on different materials that we've talked about in here to give to people. But I think right now, quick fixes with what staff's doing with our staff time and how we're resourcing and gonna handle them to begin the year. The good reaction of the current management company. I'm curious what's, in a very hopeful way, curious that I think they're gonna take care of it. I really do. Am I certain? No way. I mean, and also, I mean, college kids are only, all people that like to party have a point where they just want to have a party, and that's gonna happen, so we just gotta kind of deal with it. But I think as we're moving those, if we could really get to the ordinance, so we can kick this off to the attorney to meet the timelines you put in place, I really think we're close to, I don't think you're gonna be able to finish by July 15th. I told you that, and I'm gonna throw it out there publicly. But I think you could get a lot of big work done real quick, and we're real close. If we can just get into what's gotta change in this ordinance, up the fines, change the parameters, make it a little bit harder to have noisy neighborhoods.
Yeah. I agree, and I think, you know, I wanna see I think it's important that we have, and I think it's a council expectation that we have some progress for the start of the school year. There are a lot of us working on, we're gonna have this Orono Festival Days, we're building better relationships, and we need, and a lot of this is intentionality and communication and in responsiveness back to the neighborhood, where, the frustration for a lot of people has been, it's persistent, we just given up complaining, and I think it's incumbent upon us to be accountable to that, and,
Time-wise,
yeah,
if you're gonna amend an ordinance, we need that language fast.
so let's do
So
it
the
today.
council
Yeah.
can set a hearing. That hearing can be held, and then 30 days later, although we can do an emergency vote. If council wants to do as an emergency order, I believe there's a process in our
Yeah,
ordinance
we
to
do.
do that. So, and again, I think that requires unanimous vote.
Yeah.
So we just gotta get that kind of process moving forward sooner than later, because
All right, why don't we try and see if we can find some consensus around this disorderly? We're not gonna talk about how big people's driveways are, or this, how we're gonna slow people down on Crosby, the Crosby Street thoroughfare, or whatever, people use it as a, to get around the lights or whatever. That's gotta stop, but that's another meeting. But let's talk, I've got 9 ideas here on, I don't know, Rob, if you wanna jump into, but 9 ideas here, open to any other ideas. Is there a consensus, of things we could bring back to the ordinance that, that get us to make some progress for us? So, and Gracie, are you online?
Yes, I'm here. I just was not on the panel, so I couldn't speak at the beginning of the meeting.
Okay. Well, please jump in if you have anything for us, okay? And I emailed you this document too, so you have it. So item number 1, scope and civil fines expanded to include occupants. We talked about this as trying to make it faster, more real. So it's not, hey, you're gonna lose some of your security deposit 9 months from now. Is there a sense that this is something we want to try and accomplish with this ordinance? Anybody?
And listen, it's a big pain in the butt for the town to try to handle this, I get it. I really believe, as someone in the trenches for 10 years, that this will make a substantial impact. If tenants get directly impacted on a civil basis by PD, that get their attention better than I could get their attention.
Yep, I like it.
And that's really what you're looking
On the
for, is get their
on
attention.
named at registration though.
No named at registration, I felt like.
Yeah.
Are we okay on
But,
that?
I mean, you would address them at the door, like who lives here.
Yeah.
and-
PD can ask them on site,
Right, right.
if I lie to a police officer, that's not a good day for me, right? So these kids PD can ask them, hey, who lives here, who's the tenants, whose party is this?
So why couldn't just the police department have the name of the tenants?
They'll get them when they show up. So when there's a problem, they'll get the names of, and then if they have to investigate it, I would assume they'd be able to go back to the rental registration, get Matt's information. This is Matt's property. Who is supposed to be here? Is that Scott? I'm sorry.
Not to be the storm cloud, but just an unintended consequence of this that I can 100% see happening just through my own experience.
I bet.
And don't get me wrong, I get all the frustration here. I just, again, my 23 years here, I know this is gonna happen. They're gonna come to a point where people aren't gonna answer the door. And then we're gonna show up. They're not gonna answer the door. We can't just walk in, drag people out, demand their names, that type of stuff. They're gonna close the lights, throw the beach towels over the windows.
We get pretty
Shut
quiet
down the
though,
music,
isn't it?
And they're gonna quiet down.
Yeah.
We're gonna stand there for a little while.
Get another call and you have to leave.
Yeah, maybe we get another call, maybe we leave, maybe we stand there for a while and just do nothing. I know this because years ago, we tried doing the whole zero tolerance on alcohol violations.
Yeah.
And so you go to a party for a noise complaint, right? You complain about the noise. You go there, and then next thing you know, we were having them dump it out. We were having everybody line up in the hallways, orchard trails. And, hammering everybody with every little thing because it was zero tolerance. Didn't take very long, people stopped answering the doors. Now what am I gonna do? I can't address the original reason why I went there, which was the noise,
Right.
because now nobody's answering the door. So in that case, I guess the best option is to go back and hold the landlord accountable.
Right.
Excuse me, landlords.
In that situation, though, the landlord can let you into the property. All landlords will have a clause, all intelligent landlords will have a clause that says, we don't have to give you 24 hours notice if it's an emergency,
I
is a
can't walk in there like that.
No, but we could let you in. I could consider that emergency. Hey, PD's here.
Nope.
No,
Nope.
you don't think so?
No, if,
All right,
as
so
far as we're concerned,
Yeah,
those people renting that property,
Yeah.
that is their home.
Uh-huh.
So they have every bit of rights to that, privacy and all that stuff, as I do my house where I live. So you may be able to do that as a landlord for,
Right.
you know, some sort of
But you-
inspections or whatever, maintenance, whatever you need to do. I'm not stepping foot
Yeah,
across
yeah,
that
got
threshold,
it. Yeah.
because that would be a Fourth Amendment.
Yeah,
violation.
gotcha.
Yep.
Makes sense.
so at what point, if there's,
So I just wanted to bring up
Yeah.
the unintended
Yeah, yeah.
consequence of, like, you know, if we're brainstorming and we're
Yeah.
trying to come up with ideas, and just let's, you know, maybe keep that in mind too. I know we want to whack
Yeah.
these people, send a strong message and all that stuff, and
yeah,
I completely get the frustration. Again, been here long enough. I do understand,
yeah.
but I can,
So do you
Yeah.
think we should do this at all? I mean, do you have another idea?
I don't have a great
Okay.
answer for you.
But
Sorry.
like, just try this and.
But as soon
we
as,
may
you know,
have-
sitting here listening to this and talking about it, I'm like, this is the zero tolerance alcohol thing all over again.
Yeah,
So we're gonna show up and, you know,
Yeah.
people are saying get names and all this type of stuff, and if they don't answer the
Visual.
door.
well, yeah, I don't
This
think
is not
this is,
something I'm gonna be able to write a search warrant for.
So if you usually, you drive up, you turn off your lights and you walk from like a distance.
Yep.
And then, you know, again, because usually it's in the fall or the spring, so people are always outside. So then you start talking to the people that are outside, and then it's almost too late for them to close the doors. And I remember being a college student too, and I remember closing the doors. So again, and just for my own, is that simply because you're a criminal police officer? But again, if it was somebody who was like a community person, outreach person, that person could, like a landlord, could knock on the door and say, open the door. I know you're having a very large party or something like that. It's simply because you're a criminal police officer. Is that why you can't do that?
I can't do, I'm sorry, I
You
don't,
can't knock on the door and, you know, and open the door.
so for
That's.
the
yeah.
bulk of my career, when we would get a noise complaint, right? So now somebody's made a complaint. I'll dispatch, they made a complaint about this. We go, we show up, basically stand there, and we've fallen on the disorderly conduct state law, right? Title 17, section whatever it was, disorderly conduct. Is this unreasonable? Yep, you know, it's midnight, I can hear the noise, I can hear the boom, boom, boom of the bass, I can hear
Yeah.
girls screaming, you know, whatever it is. That's unreasonable. We go, we knock on the door, try to get the tenants to come to the door. They come to the door, hey, we're here for a noise complaint. Get their ID, get their information, give you a disorderly conduct warning, come back again within the next 24 hours, you can get someone and or arrested. Highly recommend you clear the party out now while we're here. So that we, you know, if we're here and you're helping to clean the party out, I'm not gonna whack you for it, right? You're trying to work with us, we'll do that. Stick around, hopefully they'll clear the party out, they dump it out. We kind of stay out on the sidewalk, edge of the property kind of thing, make sure people chew along. And that was typically the end of it. The disorderly property ordinance in years past has been convoluted and been a little bit more difficult for officers to work with. The updated version is better, and I think it takes some education on our part. But again, that brings in the whole, you know, are we just, for years, I've been telling people, hey, listen, we don't just drive around and look for houses with a bunch of cars in it and go, hey, let's go screw with these guys, right? For years, I've been telling people that we don't do that. We get a complaint. Somebody made a complaint about your property. That's why I'm here. I'm not here because I just decided to come pick on Johnny and his friends and I want to bust up your party. But to some extent, it kind of sounds like that's what we're asking for now, is for the officers to just drive around and be like, hey, you know what? I think that's a problem. And to some extent, we should be able to do that. We should be trusted to be able to do that. But
that's the complexity of this, is because
the
people aren't
complexity of it, yeah.
calling either,
Yes,
you know,
Yeah.
and we need
Even
to.
if I call, if they turn out the lights, you can't, it's not like you can bust in.
Nope, not whatsoever.
But the good news is,
Which is
one of
good.
our stated goals is to try to make these neighborhoods quieter, more reasonable. And I get it, he's bound by unreasonable search and seizure, Fourth Amendment, totally understand that. But if he shows up, knocks on the door, and they turn the lights off, they turn the music down, and they don't answer the door. Haven't we really gotten what we want? Regardless, if he can't hold them accountable, they've stopped, right? Isn't that what we want? Just now they're like, whoa.
And for the most
crap,
part,
you know what I mean?
for the most part, that's what's happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There has
Yeah.
been times where we stand around, we try to make contact.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, we make a presence, that whole thing. We're there for a little while and then we leave.
Yep.
And then they're like, gone. And it just
And-
fires back up. That,
For one, I'm very grateful that this is the approach of the police
Me
department,
too.
where there is not any thought of infringing on people's Fourth Amendment rights.
Right.
And I don't want to really entertain sort of any venturing into those waters. However, as far as trying to figure out how to hold the tenants more accountable, there could be a policy of, you know, if they answer the door and all of these other criteria have been met, they are given a fine right then. What's your name? And if that creates an incentive that they're not going to answer the door anymore, they turn off the lights, they do all those things that you're just saying, well, we sort of solved it temporarily. You could still then, I don't know what this looks like administratively, how much time this takes, have outreach to the landlord and say who lives in this property. So it's still not creating all of this extra administrative burden of creating a registry, who, you know, creating this list of who lives everywhere. And more, when there's a problem, we have the means to find out who lives there and still pass on that fine directly.
It doesn't, and also, I think those are excellent points, right from the Fourth Amendment piece all the way down. Doesn't it also create a track record for you if you have to evict a problem tenant, if there's
Yeah,
police calls and
absolutely.
things like
The
that?
fact that you went there.
Now, do landlords know when a police officer goes to a residence or
Right,
one of the
yeah.
apartments that has been a complaint? Do you know?
Yeah.
You get the
If-
report?
To his point, if I need to evict a tenant for just terrible behavior over a period of time, judge isn't gonna say, Matt, you look trustworthy, that sounds great, they're out. He's gonna say, show me.
Yeah, your flip flops aren't gonna be enough.
To
We're
me,
gonna
that
have
they
to,
have
yeah.
violated your document
Yeah.
and that they can't live there. And nothing is gonna make a judge happier than police reports to be like, here you
Well,
go.
And not
There
just
you
the
go.
reports, though, part of the proactive policing that with Ed Lesky as the community resource officer is that Dan working with them on a weekly basis, where have we been this weekend, what's going on, and we have a rental registration. So really taking that time saying, you know, we might not have cited for a disorderly property, but FYI, we did have to go to your house and this was dealt with. You know, and again, and I think that's where I think you said earlier about socially responsible policing. We want to continue to have the officers' discretion. If they show up and a group of 5 or 6 kids are having a very loud event in their apartment and there's a complaint, but then the police officers show up and they're like super apologetic, never had a complaint there before, immediately turn it down. I'm not gonna guarantee you we're giving them a ticket.
How much different is it if
Problem
he goes
solved.
to a large party and they turn off all the lights? Well, aren't you still gonna get in touch with the landlord and say you were there? And I mean,
Yes,
as
that's
far
what I'm
as you
saying,
know,
that-
it was still a big party and it was very loud and there was, you know, who knows, whatever else you might observe there, even though they didn't open the door, it's not like it didn't happen.
And they log it, and that's what I'm saying, that's where we wanna get working with Ed on a regular basis, saying, hey. This, you're not meeting our code of conduct, you're not meeting what our expectations are.
There's so many pieces to this that are like, you can push on, they're gonna make a little bit of a difference, and there's no one thing that's gonna make any, you know, that we would as a community find tolerable. You know, I mean, there are things that other agencies are doing in other parts of the country that I think we have a real problem, you know, many have a real problem with. That's not the type, we're gonna have to push in a lot of different ways. We're gonna have to get the neighbors ready to call 911. We're gonna have to get reports in the Ed Lesky, and we're gonna have to work with the university, and so. And I think instead of. Yeah, so why some of these elements aren't the full, nothing here is the full solution. It's all, is it additive? Does it make us make a better package of responses to behaviors that aren't acceptable in our residential neighborhoods?
I think Rob's really hit the nail on the head with an efficient approach to this, right? Honestly, truly.
Can you reiterate it again, Rob?
Sure. So, still having it be complaints based. So that we're not sort of wading into the waters of trying to push on some of these rights issues. But showing up to the door, delivering a fine directly to the tenant, in addition to whatever landlord fine we want to maintain or grow, both of these directions. And, you know, if they answer the door, they give the name, you give them it directly to them. If they do what we were just saying, or what you were just saying, you know, it is a likely outcome, which students will be then trained not to answer the door necessarily, although we get new batches of students who don't necessarily, you know, have that same lesson yet. You can reach out to the landlord, find out who lives there, without having to create a huge registry. I guess that's about it.
Yeah, I like it.
No problem.
So you're only getting tenant
Yes.
information when there's a legitimate problem that PD has identified, yes, no, this happens.
So you're saying, much like on a traffic stop, let's say somebody's going 20, 25 over whatever it is, College Ave, I pull them over for speeding, I'm gonna write them a ticket. That's not a crime. Okay, that's a civil offense. It's not a criminal offense. 30 over, that's criminal speeding. Below that, it's against the law, but it's not a crime. So there's some of that stuff that we can enforce that's not criminal, but it is civil, right? So you're saying, if I understand you right, we would show up and we would essentially give them a fine or some sort of ticket right then and there? And I'm just wondering what the mechanism for us for that is, because we have nothing like that.
We did.
Yeah, I'm unsure.
Don't get me wrong, and I'm not
No,
arguing.
no, I
You're saying-
hear you. I appreciate the question. You know, part of it maybe is up to your discretion, but having the ability to give a ticket. I mean, how does the process usually go for making the decision to find the landlord right now?
Per ordinance, it's up to the police chief and the town manager to meet, go over it, make the determination, contact them, bring them in.
So
And I think
it's-
all he's kind of getting at is we would just probably have to pay to have a citation
So,
drafted
yeah,
that is in every officer's
and I,
to pass out and, you know what I mean? And that's where you'd want some lawyer help, you know, pursuant to, Orono local ordinance, chapter 2, article 3, disorderly properties, you have been notified you were on this date and time, you were found in violation.
so we're still on, 1 of 9 in terms of things we want to try and accomplish. And we're done, like, we gotta, go ahead.
Well, although 8 and 9 sort of also do fit
Yeah.
into that.
Okay, yeah. So we'll move fast at the end, but if we could talk about the things we think we want to try and have a consensus of things we want to accomplish to address, the behaviors that are really challenging. And then not so much why we can't do it, but then we'll charge staff and lawyers to think about these things in terms of just kind of set some aspirations in terms of what we think would be helpful if it's permissible, legal. So it feels like finding a way to create some accountability in terms of a civil fine for occupants is something we want to accomplish. Is that something to kind of a general census on that? You're right with that?
This is the single most effective thing that we have talked about in all of these meetings that will work. And as a landlord, I'm completely fine paying half. But if the tenants are paying half issued by a PD officer, I'm telling you, this is going to make a big difference.
All
I'm
right.
telling you.
So that's one, we have consensus. We're gonna try and find a way to achieve that in any kind of ordinance recommendation we move forward with if we get to that point. In terms of the definition of disorderly activities, and that is on section under definitions, disorderly activities, 2053. Are we interested in expanding those? And I know that some of these are illegal on their face or criminal activities on their face. But in terms of identifying, there's 2 steps in this process. There's disorderly activities, and then there's some accumulation of those activities that eventually someday lead to the declaration of a disorderly property. And a disorderly property is when the relationship building is really in place with the landlord. So if we're still using this ordinance as a framework, are we interested in adding more activities as disorderly, like obstruction of streets by crowds or parked cars? Is that something we think is disorderly activity? Consensus there?
Not always.
Give you that discretion, right? Like if Brian has 10 people at his house for
I'll lock him up. but-
1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, but I kind of get Leo's point.
Yeah.
If I gave the example, somebody had a graduation party in the afternoon and there were cars up and down the whole street.
Yeah.
They didn't block my driveway, but how is a police officer supposed to know that that's okay? But the party that was outside the kegger, the hockey house was not okay.
All right, but do we, I mean, if people are blocking our streets with either crowds or cars, is that something we wanna, is that?
It's already a rule.
Activity? What's
It's
that?
already a rule, this town. If you don't want the rule, but it's a rule, you can't park on those streets and block traffic.
There are a lot of streets in this town that don't have any kind of parking ordinance except the winter time.
Some of the major ones, yeah, some of the, yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. But
So-
those streets would.
If you're having an event that's obstructing this, where crowds or parked cars are obstructing traffic, is that disorderly activity?
I
guess
would like
that's
to be, I haven't been able to, when they had a party and they had, cars all along, they had people that were parked in the street next to the parked car so they could talk to them, and I couldn't go to my house. So I had to back up and then go all the way around. That was a pain.
But North Main has posted no parking all the time.
Right,
And
that's why I thought.
there are
why
20
couldn't
cars
this-
parked on it anyway, and
Yeah.
nothing happens, so.
Could we add this, but I mean, is there a way of, so this in and of itself is problematic because it could be nothing or it could be something, right? But in combination with other
Right,
things on the list, then suddenly it tips the
that's what I'm,
scale. So I'm wondering if it should be there, but that's a little bit of a subjective piece. It's like, we've got this going on in and of itself, but now there's also this, and this. As a
Exactly.
basket, there are
it's
things.
a patchwork of things that lead to.
The following,
I don't-
the
I
following
don't see that
things.
it's needed, and I think that, we need a rubric that every officer is gonna have, if this, then that, and then that's.
Right.
I mean, I don't think it's necessary personally, and I think there are some unintended consequences that are, something could be nothing.
All right, but when we heard about all the cars that were parked in your neighborhood around an event in the spring or whatever it was, it feels like one of those smoke, there's fire things to me. And unsafe activity because there's likely gonna be driving associated, those cars going somewhere at the end of the evening and someone's gonna be driving them who's been at that event, but. I
And in
don't
this
know.
part of our neighborhood, it's not 5 or 8 cars. It could be 30 cars. And it does present to some extent a civic danger because sometimes the sidewalks aren't available. We have children in the neighborhood. You can't see them between the cars. I mean,
But I think it's already an ordinance or against the law, so I think it can be called on anyway, so
It's not against the law unless it's a posted street. So there's streets where it's posted that you can't park on this side of Beach Street or this side of Crosby Street. And, but as I read the parking ordinance, there's not, there's a lot of streets that aren't listed.
So I would suggest, one, we already have an ordinance that has all the parking and where you can't park on this side of the street and that side of the street for the whole town. Maybe amending that or cleaning that up for that area of town, however you'd like. And I don't expect my guys to know the ordinance of every street in town. So, and I'm not sure, I'd have to go over there and take a look, but maybe we need more no parking signs to make it very visible and clear for our guys that they can't park here.
Yeah.
A lot of the signs in town are, just sun bleached, so they're kind of white and the red letters are like barely pink now kind of thing. So maybe there's something along with that.
Yeah.
I don't know if adding parking to the disorderly property ordinance does anything that's not already possible with the current parking ordinance.
I would just, okay, let's put a pin on that one for now. And say, I don't feel like there's a strong consensus on that one right now.
I feel like Leo's concern, if I just try to reframe it, is yes, lots of cars could be an indicator of a disorderly party, because that's what we're trying to stop.
Right.
It could also be an indication that Brian is retiring and he has 20 scientists that have come over for his retirement party.
Yeah.
And they're not doing anything at all that would make them a problem for their neighbor, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think Leo's probably worried that for every one of the disorderlies, there's a grandmother who just had her
Yeah.
85th
Yeah.
anniversary, whatever,
Yeah.
birthday, and the kids are over and there's 20 cars up Mill Street. So it's an indicator, but it's not, it's not a sole indicator, right?
We could approach it. I mean, I know you want to put a pin in this. I think this does require more conversation. I also wonder if this might be particular to Webster and what you were just saying about maybe updating signage, making it extra clear, but yeah, I'm happy to put a pin on that myself.
There could be some spots where we need to address our parking.
Yeah.
I think, okay, that's fine. And you can have all the Subarus you want in front of Brian's house.
Right. Unless I'm assuming Brian isn't drunk and disorderly. It seems like he's not that kind of guy to me.
I park my Honda somewhere and I feel like I'm an outlier from a Toyota or a Subaru. All right, is serving minors disorderly activity? And I guess we,
Crime.
It's a crime.
so can we agree that that's a disorderly activity as well?
I don't know if I have been within my rights, but I have always told my tenants, if no one on the lease is 21 years old, they can't have any liquor there.
Yeah.
We have it as an evictable offense if you commit what we consider serious crime
Yeah.
or you serve underage people alcohol.
I think that it
Make
was
it evictable for property.
Yeah.
So
All
I
right.
would need PD to tell me that happened.
Jack.
They believe me.
All right, so it feels like that one's okay.
How would they, how does the landlord find out from our police department that a person's been cited for illegal possession?
Is it something we think is a disorderly activity, or is it something we're gonna try and,
So
is
it's
it something we're gonna-
and a criminal at the same time. Right?
Me
Okay.
personally, I like things simple.
yeah,
So if something is already addressed someplace else, I hate to fatten the disorderly property ordinance,
sure.
because all it's gonna do is make this even, it's gonna make it more convoluted to understand.
The other thing that it does is you're not gonna know that. That's gonna come out once you get there and you see people and you talk to people. That's not gonna be a contributing factor to go. You don't know if
Yeah.
that person's 21 or not going up to the.
I wanna, we need a mechanism so that we can stack these activities up to get to a disorderly, unless we're comfortable just saying Scott showed up, it was out of control, you know, in Scott's opinion, it was out of control, so the police chief's gonna in there, and that's fine with me. If, because there's gonna be awareness and accountability and expectations from a lot of us about how the department addresses these things. But my thought was, as the ordinance read now, it's like, reads like you gotta stack these activities up to get to a disorderly property designation. And if that's not the case,
Doesn't seem like you have to stack them.
Criminal activity.
Seems like.
It just said criminal activity.
I'm all about it, criminal activity.
You know, if once you get there, you find criminal activity, it's automatically a disorderly property.
This says including but not limited to music. Which,
Or-
I don't see that they have to be stacked in order to.
And then it
Like,
works in
our-
both scenarios because that would also apply to non-renter.
Yes.
So any criminal activity at any house can make that disorderly property?
It's good.
Because I mean, we're obviously trying to target the large mass gatherings and the parties and that kind of
Think
thing.
about the function of the disorderly
Yeah.
property ordinance. It feels like we might
We
be.
go to a house and we charge somebody with a crime for something. Is that? necessarily mean
Would that be
Or just they have some other issue going on?
It's in concert with the other pieces to why you're there. If you just go to a property to, for that type of thing, but it's a large gathering, you know, that type of thing with criminal activity. I mean, I think that puts it over. I don't think you have to have criminal activity to make that there, but if you wanted these two things to be there, that could be part of that conversation.
Can we agree that this is, I mean, I don't know, how I'm reading it, these don't have to be stacked. It's, which almost is like, you know, or other similar activities occurring. I mean, that's a catch-all to some degree. So adding these specifics in there, I don't think makes sense,
All right.
especially when it's criminal.
So that makes sense to me. The next item links nuisance conduct throughout a neighborhood to the unruly gathering. So as I understand, I think from what I've heard from people, one of the challenges is people come to a party, when they leave a party, they trespass, they, you know, use the restroom on people's lawns, they make noise in the. Do we want to make that activity a link to a disorderly activity if it happens within the neighborhood?
I mean, I honestly don't care whether it gets declared a disorderly property 3 days later.
Right.
I care that there's a police presence when a party breaks up so that doesn't happen. So I'm not sure this really, right, I'm not sure this, go back to my point, I'm not sure this addresses the immediate emergence issue of the party. Right, and I feel like, I don't know, we can have a conversation about whether.
That almost sounds like we want the police officers to hold the people holding their hands, make sure they're not throwing trash. I mean, how do you prove that somebody left that party through a beer can or?
Yeah, I don't care. I really don't. I don't mean to be flip. I want to be able to get properties that are hosting these events that are just awful for, you know, behavior, for neighborhood peace and quiet and safety. I want to be able to get them on the disorder, appropriately so, on the disorderly property, and I don't mean, I'm sorry, on the disorderly property declaration so that we can address it.
You want to label them.
Yeah, I want to label, if you're on the naughty list, I want to, and that's what I think we're trying to do, and it doesn't have to be that complicated. But the ordinance as it's written now strikes me that, I think we're getting more proactive engagement with the ordinance now than maybe we had experienced in the past. And I think that's a management decision, and I think that's a kind of community focused decision. But I want to make it clear that these activities lead to this declaration. And I don't care how we stack them, I don't care what
How far does that extend? So if I go to Brian's house, he's having a party, I leave his house. How far am I going, or what's either the distance or the time that I'm going and I'm
Yeah.
acting like an idiot at somebody
Right.
else's property? Is it I walk from his place and I walk up to the reserve?
well, I don't know, the assault at Tom's
Just
house.
food for thought.
Yeah, no, I get it. But the assault that happened with Tom,
Block away.
a block away, and it was linked back to they attended an event at that house on North Main, whatever.
Same in the fall.
Yeah, and they declared, that was garnered, I guess, from investigations or whatever, that's where they were coming from. So I don't know, but
Again, if I leave his place and I walk from there up Park Street and let's say the house across from the reserve, and I break into that.
Yeah.
Because I'm drunk and I'm stupid or
Mhm,
whatever. Does that come back to bite him in the butt? Or is that solely?
well, and the kid died a
I'm
couple
just-
of years
and
ago,
again, I'm
right?
not- Just food for thought about like how far distance and time can you hold the tenants that had the party responsible for?
We talked about that with
Somebody's
the
idiot
bartender,
behavior.
right? The bartender serves anyone alcohol, and then they go out and they kill somebody in their car.
Yep.
Are they responsible in some way? And we talked about that there was some type of responsibility from, or maybe.
Well, and from the town's perspective, though, we're erring on the side of, there's a few premises. Step one, if it's a rental, landlord chose to rent that property out to someone else. So if there ends up being a problem there, landlord, you signed a tenant agreement. If you don't like your tenant agreement, sell your house, get out of the landlord business, but this is the reality of Orono. The other side of this is that if you decide to have a party, and we're clear at communicating that there are disorderly property rules, we're a little less concerned about how long or how far someone gets. If we find out that they end up on campus and do a horrific crime on campus, we find out that they were at Dan's house this time, we'll move them out of Brian's, and you have a disorderly property. We're gonna get you for disorderly property, because at this point, it's just enough's enough. You said we're drawing lines, these are large scale properties. Now, is it 3 days later? Yeah, I don't think it's 3 days later. We know what's connecting and plausible, and I think that's where it still works in this ordinance, that the chief and the manager, the day after, the weekend after, could sit and meet and say, I think this is disorderly property. I got 83 complaints in my inbox from that party since it broke up, or, hey, here's the arrest warrant. Somebody committed a heinous crime just a mile and a half away, and the police report says, I was at a party at this house. So, I mean, I think that's where we gotta kind of use a little bit of that discretion. It's not gonna be perfect, and it's gonna be hard, and we're not gonna get rid of disorderly properties.
I think a
We're
lot
just gonna make it known what we intend to do if you are one.
And listen, if you had, I'm sorry. Rob, go
So
ahead.
just real quick, I think one thing that comes to mind for me around this, I mean, clearly there's a repeat offender situation happening here, but a lot of parties, the people who are holding the party also aren't necessarily the ones furnishing the alcohol either. People are bringing their own. So, and I've been at gatherings when I was in college when people came and they were way too drunk. They were disorderly for the people around them and they were kicked out of the party. And then I wonder about how the person hosting the party should be held responsible for the person that they in fact kicked out. I know that might be an exceptional circumstance.
True.
You open that door when you have that party. And you have to realize, and this is why, I mean, what we really would love to do is for kids to understand, here are all the things that can happen. You know, you can get these fines, you can be labeled a disorderly property, and you could even have maybe that language in there, like if somebody were to come to your house drunk, you're gonna be responsible. I mean, they might be able to even think about that in there, but in their own minds, but that's the problem with having a huge gathering, is you get more and more people that you don't even know. And the hockey people, they didn't necessarily know that guy who beat the other guy up,
Yeah.
right? So, but that's what happens.
Yeah, I just,
Because I don't know how you would police it otherwise.
well, I think as far as labeling a property disorderly, I feel like the repeat situation is really essential to this versus one mistake one time.
Agreed.
Is there language
And that
about,
was, no, yeah, and that's kind of what I was trying to do with these activities, right? I wanted to find if you had, 3 disorderly activities, then you become a disorderly property. Or if you had 1 disorderly activity after 10 PM, if that's the witching hour that we want to, as a community, set for a disturbing event, then you rate on the property. And I get that there's police chief and manager. We've had this ordinance on the books for a long time, and I think the frustration that people have is that it doesn't feel like it's been particularly effective in the time that we've had it. And that's, when we wrote about this the community development committee, we looked at this ordinance. This is a fine ordinance if it's implemented correctly. If there's, if people lean into it and work on it. But in terms of, do we throw the thing out and rewrite it based on the things we want to have? Or do we try and tweak it and make it, achieve the things that we want? So far, we've agreed that we think that the occupant ought to have some skin in the game in terms of a civil fine. I want there to be room and grace for people not to be a disorderly property if they're having, we show up one time, but come on, it's 9:30, it's getting late, it's too loud. But so how do you write that in the law? How do you bring that to the council? In a black and white piece of paper where we're gonna be able to talk about it and react to it, because there's other members we're gonna have to.
I think to your point, I do, and just from reading, again, it's been a while since I've looked at this. I remember talking about it years ago, but I mean, I do feel like, and we've heard it, it's effective and it works. And the leading in piece is, and some minor tweaks, increasing the fines. If it is possible to have tenants responsible, but I mean, I think overall, we have to listen to what we're hearing, that it is working, and we're also realizing that, hey, well, make the call.
Yeah.
Neighbors gotta make the call.
that's what I was gonna ask about the language in the disorderly property. Is there anything about how many calls have been placed to,
No.
911?
Probably my
I
opinion.
don't like that one either.
What's that?
I don't like that one either.
Yeah, I wonder, I mean, yeah, I hate this property, so I'm gonna keep on calling. Is that what you're gonna?
I know.
'Cause
You gotta
that's what I was wondering, because I didn't see anything.
Meter far enough yet to go
Yeah.
get.
So if it's the civil, and we're running up against time, and we had 5 things on the agenda, and this is the only one we're gonna get to today, and that's fine. Because I think this is an important one. And I think this conversation kind of helps define what we think a good neighbor is too. I mean, we're hitting other elements of our agenda. But if it's the fine piece for tenants, if it's increasing the fines, and is that what we need to do with this ordinance in terms of,
Leo's point about making the actual landlord, the owner show up.
the owner show up?
Yeah,
We okay with that one?
I really want my neighbor or owner in Massachusetts to have to show up in person the next time he runs to the lacrosse game.
Well, they do have a local agent that they have.
Yeah, that's what I don't want.
Yeah.
Make him come. If he owns the property, he
I'm
needs
good with
to.
that, as long as the hedge fund guy in New York who owns some of the big
LLC.
complexes shows up too, I'm happy to show up.
Well, I also, if we give it
It
advance.
applies to me, it applies to the big boys too.
Is it first time? Maybe first time Zoomable, second time in person? I don't know. I mean, that's,
That
I
was
don't
an
know.
ordinance. So that's
I don't know
never
how many
been.
are out of state.
When you say show up, what do you mean?
I mean, physically, in person with the police chief.
Oh, you mean come here and.
Yes.
meet? I mean,
Hey, I'll do it first.
So
Don't mind
There's
at
a
all.
site,
remediation
We tell
process.
yeah,
that's fine.
right. I mean, the
See,
remediation
I mean,
process.
just so we're clear, the local agent was more for in the moment. So somebody can get there quick versus
Right.
them meet with
But
somebody.
I see.
And the remediation, it still says they can send their agent.
I was just trying to clear that up.
Yeah, and really, there's no point
About
in
the property owner did have to come.
or owner showing up in the midst of the party, though. There's nothing we can do and probably would cause
Listen, yeah.
danger to yourself, but yeah, the remediation, the owner's duly authorized agent, I think that's where if we do away with the agent, if you get to this point, and I guess it's the first time they're being noticed as a disorderly, or that, I think that's part of the process for the first time you've been classified as a disorderly. This is what happens, the remediation process, so if you get, and I'm not saying I'm not saying if it's that first call the first time you go. I don't really know that, I guess, when you look at this, but.
Yeah, this doesn't say the first time there's a noise complaint called in. This says when the police chief has decided it's a disorderly property, there will be a remediation.
And that will probably need multiple. What I was gonna say, Dan, is, you know, this guy right here, this officer, he's a frontline guy, I'm a frontline guy. We like things simple so that we can enforce in the moment. Fines work. Double, I've heard Clint say a bunch of times, we're losing money on the fines because they're just not high enough to double them. That'll work. If you could find a way that's not a complete administrative nightmare for you to split them, tenants and landlords, I think that's a very good way to get attention. I think disorderly property is actually pretty solid as it's written. I think, so the third piece, communication. If the folks of Orono here, listen, we're doubling the fines, we're gonna crack down on enforcement. And just so you're aware, there is a disorderly property ordinance, and if enough parties happen at a place, the town manager and police chief can declare it disorderly, and that landlord is in for a rough ride. And I think if you communicate those things, people will take this seriously and go, all right, there's double the fines, they're gonna enforce it, and they're gonna start labeling routine hockey house type of situations disorderly. I think that gets you really a long way to where you wanna go. And then you could fine tune it after that if you needed to. Yeah, try that for a year, whatever period is you decide, and say, hey, listen, we could fine tune a few things.
Right.
I think you got a good ordinance here, honestly.
And I am too, truly. I'm a 70% guy. I always win because I take, you know, like 70% of where I want to, I have like a direction. I said like directionally, I want to go in this direction. And then that's, for me, that's kind of like the vision. We're going to go this way. And then everybody's viewpoints kind of help shape the vision.
Right.
And then you make progress and you declare victory and you keep going.
Yeah, if you need to, yeah.
So that's kind of, and that's, I think that's good progress. How do people feel about stuff, a 10 o'clock line or an evening line, time of day? 10 PM, some, a little more teeth into this thing at 10 PM? Okay, everyone's okay with that?
I think that's a key piece, and it goes to the communication too, right?
Yeah, it's gotta be quiet hours. One of those quiet hours start at 10 PM.
Students have to, or whoever,
Yeah.
people who are holding parties have to know what the expectation is. Party away till 10 o'clock, as long as
We're
you're
not
not
gonna make people get,
drunk and disorderly, but.
yeah.
I'm up at 4:30 every morning. If you're going till 2, I'm not getting sleep, you know?
Yeah.
Some reading before that.
All right, I think we're kind of at the end. I know I appreciate people's patience with me. You know, you try and get things done.
If the committee's good, I think you've given a lot of context here, and as long as we know it's not black and white yet. Now I feel we're at enough place where I could actually talk to the attorney and say, don't go spin your wheels. This is how I'd like to focus them in, so if you're okay, I'll try to see if we can get something back. To get some draft language kind of crafted around all these points.
Perfect. I
We'll
really
see
do
what we come up with.
appreciate all the input, people, Scott, and people on the front line.
While we're looking at the disorderly property, that very first paragraph in the purpose, can we look at the wording in that? If I was a guy that got offended, as a landlord, like to be offended, saying eliminating the proliferation of properties harboring occupants disturb the peace.
What do you want, what do you think it should say? Is that?
Am I thinking? Well, it doesn't, I mean, I was never an English major, but wouldn't harboring say that I'm willfully concealing the location or providing a place for somebody to hide? I mean, typically that language is used when you're harboring a criminal. It's not used when I've got some 20-year-old kid that can't behave.
Yeah, okay.
They just. And at first I thought proliferation of properties, but this lady's telling me that maybe that is happening. I just didn't realize that there were many additional rental properties coming on. Because the present code really limited a lot of that. I would find it very difficult as a businessman to make money with a single family house that I can only let 3 tenants in.
Yep, agreed, you can't make money.
And you
Yeah, you
can't
can.
speak-
I don't know why they're doing
Can't
it. You
speak to
can't make
Webster's
money.
side,
They
but the
said-
data
they
that
said
was
they were
gathered
making
from this
lots of money doing
group
it.
shows
Yeah.
a decrease overall. There's a decrease overall per the data that this group that met back in February and presented.
Yeah.
That previous report shows a decrease in the number of single family homes that are, so they've gone away as rentals. So maybe not directly across the street from you, but overall.
The problem is that one somehow
Got,
turned into a rental with 5 tenants just before the no more than 3 unrelated got sent out, grandfathered forever as 5. Even though it was a single family home,
But it's 2 units.
All right, anything else?
it wasn't two units.
I don't want to quit just because it's 10:30, but it's 10:30. Anybody have,
I mean,
we're gonna meet at 3?
Yeah.
All right, thank you, and we'll get an email around about other things. Sorry, I jumped on you at one point, kind of, sorry.